Welcome back, friends, to Ears to Hear, number 22. It's February 27th, early Saturday morning, and
Too early.
Too early,
It's
that's
too
right.
early.
I'm here with my comrades in arms, my partners in crime, with Alan and Kimball. And here at the top of the show, we just want to remind everybody that we have our Gmail, our email account, which is earstohearpodcast@gmail.com. And we'll thank those that have already responded, and we've taken your responses so far. We've been listening to those, and we appreciate those. And for all those who are going back through the beginning, we feel for you. There's great information there if you can get past the audio problems, but we appreciate what you've sent in so far.
Maybe someday with enough email responses, we'll do a question and answer session.
Yep. That would be great. That's the dream, people. Bring it on. But I am going to throw it over to my good friend Alan over here, and he's going to introduce our topic for the day.
Right. So today we are talking about temples, and obviously we have to tread somewhat carefully on that.
Yeah.
And
everyone just got really nervous.
Yeah, and thus we will. But we wound up kind of going in different directions with our study, purposely, actually. I knew kind of where, I definitely knew where Kimball was going to go with it. So I stayed away from my same book that you have there in your lap. And I went into a different direction with it. I wound up going into some Hugh Nibley stuff for sure, but also into some Elder Oaks and into a couple of other BYU publications, I guess. But there's a nice little quote here by Hugh Nibley, and I'm gonna go ahead and play this, and then I'm gonna insert it so it sounds better into the actual audio file.
"23 years ago today, if you will cast your minds back, on this same occasion I gave the opening prayer, in which I said, quote, 'We have met here today clothed in the black robes of a false priesthood.' Now, many have asked me since then whether I really said such a shocking thing, but nobody has ever asked what I meant by it. Why not? Well, some knew the answer already, and as for the rest, we do not question things at the BYU. But,
Okay. So, that was actually not the first time he'd ever said that. And it wasn't the last. That was something that he frequently would say and joke around about and stuff. And the most famous of those instances was in his speech at BYU called Leaders and Managers. I don't know if you guys have listened to that. I first was exposed to that on my mission. Very good talk. Maybe I'll put a link to that in the description. But it's interesting that he would say, because you guys are probably listening, some of you may have listened to that and heard that before, but I imagine that's pretty new to a lot of people. Mm-hmm. Where the context was he was at a BYU graduation ceremony. And he obviously said, we are gathered here today in the black robes of a false priesthood. And it really took everybody back. And it was interesting, and a lot of people, like he was saying, not a lot of people asked him what he meant by that. And so he wound up putting out a lot of stuff talking about what he meant by that. Mm-hmm. And it was very interesting, because if you just take a minute as you're listening to us, and if you've been through the temple before, you can think about the temple clothing. And if you haven't, go look up the garments of the priests, the Levitical priests, and you'll have a pretty decent idea.
Well, and the church has its own publication out where they have a picture of the clothes laying on a table. They have a picture of the garments. They have a picture of all kinds of things in the temple. a lot of people, I think, approach the subject as, well, I can't really talk about anything that goes on in the temple. But if you look at what the church has actually published publicly, hey, here's what we do in the temple. Here's a whole bunch of pictures of all the rooms. Here's a bunch of pictures. I mean, like, really the stuff that we don't talk about, it's just because it's the specific covenants you make that people aren't ready for until you go in. Yeah. There's a few sacred things, and there's a reason why if the origin words of sacred and secret are so similar in Latin.
Yeah.
They're super similar. There's a reason. And it's because if you want to, you could probably find a YouTube video watching everything. There's probably not any super mystery you couldn't dig into, but if you have respect and regard for virtue, then do it the right way, go to the temple the right way, and learn this stuff in a sacred way.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things we learn from the temple is that how Satan operates, part of what he does is to take things out of order.
Exactly.
Because it becomes a stumbling block. Whereas if everything is done in the correct time, line upon line, as it should be, it actually works for the benefit of everybody involved.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely. But it's interesting because if you compare the university to the temple, there's some similarities there, right?
Yeah.
There's some hardcore parallels and some similarities. Yeah. And obviously, Hugh Nibley was a very accomplished student, as well as a professor and stuff.
Yeah.
And for him to make some parallels there, talking about meeting in the black robes of a false priesthood, I think it's interesting that when you graduate, that you are in black robes, and then think about the actual robes, the cap, the tassel.
Moving the tassel from one
yes,
side to the other.
Yes.
Yep.
And interestingly enough, when you move the tassel, you move it from the right to the left.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, and there's obviously some symbolism there as well.
Mm-hmm.
And even going down to the class ring, and I didn't know this until I did this study, but the class ring it was very symbolic of eternal life.
Hmm.
It wasn't
a circle.
Yeah. It wasn't just something you'd give your girlfriend, right? That you'd have her wear, and so with your Letterman jacket. But it was interesting that if you go into it and start looking at the symbology of the clothing, there's a hardcore parallel with the temple, like they call it the mortar cap, right? There's obviously, it goes back to pretty much every ancient civilization. Mm-hmm. So there's different interpretations amongst different civilizations, but there are hardcore common themes. Yeah. And with the mortar cap, almost every one of them going back anciently, and the more ancient you go back, the more you see this, is that it was meant to hold a crown, right? Mm-hmm. And it was symbolic of going from a lower state to a higher state, right? And then obviously the tassel comes into play with that and stuff. But anciently, or even going back a couple hundred years, the professor, right, once he was done being a student and he graduated, he was then required to wear his robes in the university. And the university students were required to, as they attended the university, to wear their robes and their cap and their gown and stuff. It wasn't just a graduation thing. It was something that you did all throughout. Class. Yeah, you did it in class.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it was very interesting.
Yeah. Well, everything in history denotes that this religious stuff is significant.
Right.
So Casey and I have talked. There is a predominant feeling of teaching about the temple and the church where people will say, you go and it's kind of weird, but don't worry about it. And that bugs me so bad.
Yeah, it's wrong.
People aren't prepped to go.
Mm-hmm.
People are told, yeah, they do some crazy stuff in there, but what we do at church, it's true, and regular church is still true, even if it's kind of odd at the temple.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, it's like it should be the exact opposite way.
Yeah, exactly.
What we do at the temple is religion. What we do at church is like watered down, pathetic version. All ancient cultures throughout all history share commonality in their religion, in their religious rites, in particular that it dominated their life. The symbology and the language and the practices were a constant presence, and the actual practice of religion was super symbolic, super ritualistic, and constant. And we think that that's weird.
Yeah.
Because in the last 2,000 years of the Great Apostasy, the world has abandoned religion. Intentionally so. Satan has tried to convince everyone that what the temple does is weird, when in reality that is true religion.
Right.
And what we do at church is just the most watered down attempt to just gradually bring people in.
Yeah.
But
well, and to go along with that, the reason why everyone says it's weird is because Satan has co-opted what's been in the temple for years through his channels and through media and everything that we've experienced now, so that when we come back to the original, unfortunately we've interacted with Satan's corrupted version so much, or so that when we go back there, it's almost like it's echoing that, unfortunately. But it's like you said, we need to realize the truth that this is the origin of these things, and that Satan then offshoot from that. And then at that point, we can start to, okay, maybe we can turn back to home a little bit, we turn back to base.
Well, and isn't it funny, too, that how many people think of a graduation ceremony and think that's weird? Look at how ritualistic it is.
Mm-hmm.
Look at a white coat ceremony, right?
Yeah.
It's all super ritualistic.
Yeah. But it's just normal in our society.
Yeah, it's normal to us.
Yeah.
Yeah. It takes a study of history and an awareness of history to realize that, and religion in general, to realize that origin matters. It matters a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Because where we're at right now, everything, literally everything, is perverted and disgusting compared to what its origin was meant to be.
Yeah. Just like how our bloodlines are so polluted at this point, so is a lot of the truth,
And that's where, if anyone hasn't listened to it, episode 15, where we talk about cosmology and science in regards to religion, the reason why they got to that point is looking at 100 different cultures in history and their records and their rites and their traditions and their history that they had written of, and said, nothing we see in science today echoes that. So what story are these united cultures trying to tell? Now, from the gospel perspective, we know the origin was Adam.
Mm-hmm.
The origin of man. Adam and Eve, and their 1,000 years of living on the earth in a fallen, but still, if you read any of the true Saturn myths of Adam was revered as the god of the world. The creatures around him bowed to him as their creator. The world itself revered this giant, literally, like maybe stories tall, of a man. And as he walked the earth, he was revered as like the great progenitor, the great god of the land. In some cultures refer to him that way. You have 1,000 years of that. You have the flood come after, where the majority of Adam's children, to the tune of, who knows, maybe 1 billion people lived on earth. But the righteous left was Noah and his family.
Mm-hmm.
Enoch's city had been taken off the earth. You have a flood. But Noah was born just after Adam died and was compatriots with everyone through Adam. He was aware of all the priesthood lineage. It was given to him. He was the next patriarch. And from him, the dissemination around the world occurred. the Tower of Babel and the splitting of languages, but everyone had the same origin. So it's not surprising that in all these ancient cultures, they all share similar rites. They all share similar histories and records. And in Hugh Nibley's book, Temple and Cosmos, he quotes a guy with a theory explaining this strange worldwide phenomenon. He says, C.J. Jung is his name, "With primitives, nothing alters, except perhaps the language. Religious rites have grown spontaneously out of the basic conditions of human nature, which are never invented and are everywhere the same. There is nothing natural in the performance of rites. All extant rituals are derived from a single ritual system. In all religions, the myths, the doctrines, and the rites form a connected whole, including the death and resurrection of a god, a myth of creation, combat with adversity, a sacred marriage, a triumphant procession. The evidence suggests that the originators of all known languages were people of acute and fertile minds who took pride and a pleasure in working out complex grammatical systems, which have been wholly or partly abandoned in all modern languages." So, when we look at history, we can understand our temple rites, because this ancient historical frame of reference is what we do. And a lot of people, they think, oh, Joseph Smith got it from the Masons. And I could get into that, but and I probably will.
That's some good stuff.
But the actual history is that when Joseph Smith first went to a Masonic lodge, within a matter of days, he ascended to the rank of like 26th level Grand Master, like couldn't go higher in the Masons. And if anyone knows anything about the Masons, you have to memorize and memorize and memorize rote ritual wording in order to even just get through the first degree. But every degree requires this incremental learning, this incremental progression of understanding rites and memorizing stuff to get to the next one. So he already knew everything before he became a Mason. Now you may say, well, wait a second, the Masons don't have like the true religion. No, but they're descended from the building of Solomon's temple. These Masons had the form of the temple rites and have just perpetuated it through a fallen version of priesthood, where they have a brotherhood that observes all these different rites with all these different symbols. And all these symbols too, like, if people think they're weird, this is how everyone spoke and how everyone referred to history and the gods. I mean, hieroglyphics were essentially the way everyone wrote once upon a time.
Yeah.
And the language we have today is meaningless in comparison. I mean, the letter A, like, it has no meaning other than a sound until you get further and further into history and understand all these greater connecting patterns of language.
It really is just a shadow. Our alphabet is a shadow of what it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, even the word alphabet, you know, Aleph and Bet, right?
Yeah.
It's
Alpha and beta.
Yeah, I mean, it's even our letters are based off of basically a lot of Hebrew and Roman and stuff like that, which it all goes back to the Paleo Hebrew, the Canaanite stuff. Mm-hmm. But it has lost its original pictographic meaning.
Yeah, which is another huge witness of the Book of Mormon's accuracy, because it wasn't until recently that Egyptologists realized there were essentially Reformed Egyptian and again Reformed Egyptian from hieroglyphs. Mm-hmm. And then Joseph Smith called what the Book of Mormon was a Reformed Egyptian language.
Right.
When at the time no such concepts of Egyptian existed. It was just their language.
Yeah.
But no one chronologically dated, here's where they did hieroglyphs, then it dissolved into this simpler version, then it even went simpler. Yeah. And that's what language does. That's what all things do in this world, is they get less and less complicated the further it gets disseminated, in part because you're trying to teach people who care less and less to spend mental effort into understanding, nor can they relate as easily with history.
Mm-hmm.
But the symbology of the temple, which, again, listen to chapter 15 or episode 15. But I'm going to get into more of that symbol of the sky. The earth in history is the four-cornered earth, the northwest, east, south earth. It is a square. The sky is revered as the circle, which, again, if you look at that cosmology, literally the heavens were that planet in the sky, Saturn, polar north. And as they looked, they could see heaven, and it was in the sky. They could see Earth, it was all around them. It was the circle in the sky and the square on Earth. The circle and the square together is all over our temples.
Yeah.
And the reason why is because the circle is celestial, the Earth is telestial, and the connection of the two is the temple.
When they overlap, the places where they connect.
That is the terrestrial. The temple is the terrestrial for now, until we get a millennial reign.
Yeah.
And that kind of symbology is also the compass and the square. And that's in every ancient culture. They have the compass, which, if anyone knows, it's how you draw a circle. Mm-hmm. And the square is how you draw a square. It's not super complicated.
Yeah.
Right angle.
But that's what those things were meant to represent.
They found a just interesting side note. They found was it Thomas Jefferson? One of our earlier presidents, I should say, was so impressed with the mounds and the building of the earth and stuff, and ancient ruins that were in America, in our heartland, that he had the Army Corps of Engineers go out and document it all, right, and survey everything. And one of the cities that the ancient sites and cities that they surveyed had the compass and square along with a menorah built into the actual structure of the city. Yeah. That screams Nephi to me.
Yes, yes, it does.
But it totally backs up what you're saying. These people, this was something that was known to them, right? And it meant something to them to the point where they built it into their city, right? Mm-hmm. Super symbolic. Yeah. Super cool stuff.
So here I'm showing these guys a picture, but any of you can find it if you want to look online. There's a ancient Chinese version of the eternal marriage. Yep. Where they're holding a compass and a square, this man and woman, and the story cool. Along with it is they're wearing holy garments,
is it Chinese?
Holy clothes.
Yeah, I think he said Chinese, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. There's again, if you try to search compass and the square kind of symbols, you'll find it in ancient Egyptian, ancient Mesopotamian, ancient what's the American word? But it's Mesoamerican, it's everywhere. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Stonehenge. I don't know how many people have ever looked into the true origins of Stonehenge, but it was this circle inside of a circle with a column extending from it, which again, mountain of the Lord symbol.
Right. Absolutely.
It was meant to study the stars. The entire structure of it is like a perfect study of the stars. And what did they do in Stonehenge? They all got together in the order of man and woman and man and woman. They would hold hands, sing songs. They would sing songs about creation, mm-hmm. about redemption, resurrection. They would sing songs about God. And they would perform, that was their temple rites.
Right.
I mean, again, if you've been to the temple, you will recognize thing after thing after thing of parallel in that story. Mm-hmm. The same thing is true of the Egyptians and their temple rites. They were right along the same thing.
Yeah.
I actually was able to find some Masonic induction rites, as they're quoted. And the parallels in the language is phenomenally powerful. And it's cool to me to see all these parallels, because at this point, my faith in Joseph Smith as a prophet is so rock solid.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yep.
And to see that everything he did, hundreds of years later, people found echoes from history to prove his prophetic calling. He knew everything, or very near close to everything, about religion. And we're only just now discovering things like the Book of Enoch or these ancient cultures and their temple rites.
Mhm.
But again, looking back at history, you see these literally everywhere. And when you understand that this was religion to everyone,
Yeah.
that as Noah's children disseminated throughout the earth, there are ancient traditions of Ham stealing the garments of Adam from Noah, and that these garments had like a power to them, that when Ham passed it down to his son, I forget his name, it starts with a C, and then Cush, and then Cush passed it down to Nimrod,
Mm-hmm.
that the beasts of the land observed Nimrod as their king, let alone the people of the world found him irresistible and
Interestingly enough, he was known as a great hunter.
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And
I think
so
he was
this,
cheating.
exactly.
Yep.
But this idea that Adam's clothes were these holy garments passed down, these relics passed down, that eventually Nimrod had to be killed and they were returned to a priesthood line.
Right. Well, and that's what they say. There was the coat of many colors.
Exactly.
Right. It's a weird translation, but if you go back to it, it was actually the garment of Adam.
Oh,
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
interesting.
That's why.
And that's why it was such a big deal that they took it off of
Yes.
him, Joseph, as they stuck him in that hole.
That's why they're so pissed off that he had it too.
Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't his right. It was Reuben's.
Yeah, it should have gone to the firstborn.
Yeah. And so you see parallel after parallel. Every ancient culture has references to these holy garments that by wearing them it makes you holy, or by you also being good, you reverence the garments.
Well, and the I believe Hugh Nibley said a more correct translation of coat of many colors would be coat of many markings.
Yeah.
Or a garment of markings, which is a lot more contextually cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Understanding these correct translations and these references of history, again, our temple, when we go, like, you get to experience a whole bunch of cool rites that have a lot of scriptural background.
And you're absolutely correct in that we as a Western world today have gone so far away, in a way anyway. We're very hypocritical, because going back to the university rites and stuff like that, it's totally mock religious ceremony, really.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
And we think there's nothing wrong with that, and we have all these traditions and rites and stuff that we, rites of passions, I guess we would call them, that we go through, and we say, oh yeah, it's totally normal. Yeah, I think it's totally normal to move my tassel from the right to the left. It's funny, and then we get weirded out when we go to the temple or something like that as LDS people. Something that was kind of interesting that I stumbled across, the Jews, right? They have been putting, or I should say reconstructing their temple rites back together, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they haven't had a temple in 2,000 years.
Yeah.
So I imagine that'd be kind of tough. But they have a computer, and they have it documented to the bloodline of who can officiate in the temple, right?
Yeah.
They have a high priest for the first time in 2,000 years. They also were missing a part of their temple rites. They could not figure it out. Couldn't figure it out, right? And so they started to search the world to see, is there anybody that has this? Anybody that could have come from us, descended from us, that has this missing piece, right?
Yeah, trying to work backwards.
Yeah, they were almost desperate, right? Because they have to have this in order for them to be able to get to build the third temple and officiate.
Yeah.
So guess where they found it?
That's...
They found it in America.
Okay.
It wasn't America. They found it among the Cherokee people.
Okay. Now that's significant.
It's significant, right? They find it among the Cherokee people. They were so grateful to the Cherokee people, and they recognized, because they basically came and observed the rite that they were missing.
Mm-hmm.
There was Hebrew words spoken in the rite, and this is somewhat of a tangent, but I think it plays into what we're talking about here.
It fits.
So the prime minister at the time basically said, you guys came from us. There's no way you could not have come from us.
And known that, yeah.
Yeah, and
exactly.
known that. There's no way. So they have granted the Cherokee Nation Israeli status and have given them a portion of the land in Israel. They've granted them. They said, this is your land.
That's awesome.
And if you
they
look,
only knew.
yeah, and if you look at how much land is available in Israel, that is a kingly gift.
Yeah, it's
right?
a high commodity.
That's a high commodity,
small state,
especially for everybody that's after it. For all the different kingdoms that are going for it.
But again, if you look at these ancient American rituals that they do, you have the world saying, "Oh my goodness, look at these savages." Look at these weird people and their rites. They're so backwoods. They're so back. We're so cool with our technology, and they're so backwoods. And then when you realize that everything they do has these references in it, all of it, whether it's the clothing they wear, the headdresses they wear, the rites they practice, the different things they repeat. Yeah, it's in a different language. Yeah, it's been dissolved over a few thousand years of hints and changes, but not much. But a lot of what we do is there too.
Yeah.
One of the cool things that I learned from Hugh Nibley's book, as well as the Saturn myth, is the world looked at Saturn in the sky, and when cherubim and a flaming sword, that's our sun. And as the sun was introduced to the solar system and created a crescent, as it traveled around Saturn at the moment of the fall, that was when time began.
Mm-hmm.
Garden of Eden was the happy hunting ground. That's what everyone wished they could go back to, and they couldn't.
Right.
But this clock that started to rotate in the sky, they started to count by. When they started to do this number counting, they looked up at the sky, they saw this crescent, and they imagined a bowl. They imagined the bowl of heaven holding the circle of heaven in its horns. But they also imagined that bowl on all four sides. And as they pictured that symbol of that bowl on all four sides and counting time that way, well, you don't just have one crescent. You have three, because you could see Saturn, Venus, that was drawn from Saturn as a result of the introduction of the sun, and Mars. So you have 3 planets, 3 crescents, 4 different times, which is the number
12.
So 12 oxen holding up a circle. Obviously, that is the temple baptismal font.
Right.
Baptism font. Yeah.
But it's also why ancient cultures revered Saturn, the planet Saturn, as the chronosphere, the clock of the sky. It's the whole reason we have 12 hours in a day. And we disseminate our time based on that.
Yeah, in Roman mythology, Saturn is Cronus.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so this symbology that all of us literally live every day, we have no clue of its origin. But when you understand the origin, the temple becomes very simple to understand, and it's also very cool to see that all of this has survived for, well, it had the Great Apostasy, but with Joseph Smith it was brought back, and now we have the full truth of the temple rites from Adam down.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it be the endowment ceremony, which I've always found it amazing that people give respect to the idea that you place your hand on a Bible and that you raise your arm to the square and you make a covenant in a courtroom to tell the truth.
Yep.
That people give that credit, and then they'll look at things we do in the temple that are similar and think, oh, that's weird.
Well, it's funny too because all of our founding fathers were Masons, so that was very.
Mm-hmm.
They even like we talk about the Western mindset. I guess we should say the recent Western mindset, because our founding fathers understood symbolism and they understood the rites. They understood that stuff.
It's all over our money.
Yeah.
It's why it's so integral to taking office.
Exactly.
Because they saw it similar to a temple rite as a taking on a responsibility of a covenant made with the people.
Absolutely. And especially being the leader or the representative of the people, that was something that went back to obviously ancient Israel, where you have the high priest representing the people, right? Mm-hmm. It all ties in. Going back to the Pharaoh, right?
Exactly.
Going back to the Pharaoh even. Now they took it, ran with it, obviously a different direction.
It branched.
Well, but the Pharaoh had not only all the temple rites, but in early Egypt, they had correct people practicing them.
Right.
Abraham.
Yeah. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it was when Abraham left that they began to obsess over the Book of the Dead, the Book of the Life. It was genealogy.
Mm-hmm.
They were obsessed with finding a priesthood link to Pharaoh so that they could, in right order, do these temple rites. They didn't find it, but they kept doing the temple rites anyways.
Right.
So it was a fallen version. And that's why, another one of these things we talked about in that one episode was when Moses went up and got the tablets and came back down. He saw it as the symbol of the mountain of the Lord. Mm-hmm. The people who he was with saw it as the symbol of the ox holding up heaven.
Yep.
So they built the golden calf.
Yeah. They had the counterfeit version in their mind.
But it's not just counterfeit because they worshipped an idol necessarily. Because look at our temple. We're not worshiping the cattle, but they're there.
Yeah.
And it's the fact that they didn't have authority and tried to do rites.
Well, and two, that is a direct parallel to what's it called? The Tower of Babel.
Yes, the Tower of Babel.
The Tower of Babel.
Exactly.
They were trying to do the exact same thing, and it parallels the mountain of the Lord. That's why it was such an egregious thing, is because they were trying to build it high enough to mimic what they were seeing in the sky, right?
Yeah.
And the very top part of it was the temple to Baal, or whatever they called him at the time, right? Yeah. But that was the top portion, totally a slap in God's face.
I was going to say, it's much more of an affront,
right,
at that point.
Yes.
Because they weren't trying to walk their way to heaven. They were trying to get to heaven through a different God, using the same symbology that the Lord had been granting to them since the beginning of the Earth cycle.
And they knew that God was. They knew who the correct God was. They just didn't want to go through him.
Yeah.
Because they treated their people as bricks, as slaves, as wheels in a cog.
Pink Floyd.
Yeah.
Oh, jeez. That changes that song.
I know, right?
Yes, it is. Well, and that is the exact meaning. Bricks in a Wall, Pink Floyd, is some of these ancient legends about the Tower of Babel.
Yeah.
That everyone's a brick in a wall.
I know, right?
Go back to one of our previous episodes about media.
But also this reference to the Tower of Babel, there's a lot of myths about it that they were gathering all knowledge in hopes that their knowledge would be what saved them.
Right.
From the next flood.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
From the next disaster of Earth. And the Earth was littered with disasters. Whether it be the flood or the many occurrences of close proximity planet movement until Earth reached its current gyroscopic balance. Those interactions were the lightning that carved the Grand Canyon and all of Monument Valley. If you ever want to get up into more electric universe stuff, like all those, most of our mountains on Earth that are not carved by the expulsion of volcanic rock are carved by and shaped by lightning. and the shoving off through massive winds into these other mountains near them.
And I thought about that as the Mars is it Perseverance just landed?
Yeah.
As it took that's exactly what was going through my mind when I saw the panoramic view that it took. Right as soon as it landed, I was like, yup. That looks like a place that just got zapped all over the place.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Looks like Monument Valley.
So when you understand all of these concepts and frames of references, all of a sudden the temple makes a lot of sense. Another symbology that I really love is the symbol of the veil.
Yeah.
Not only the veil at the temple, but the veil over the women.
Yeah.
And again, we have this fallen version, and we think it's somehow normal for a woman to have a veil in front of her as she gets married.
Yep.
Where do you think marriages took place?
Yeah, exactly.
Originally.
Where do you think that came from?
Yeah, where do you think that came from? Exactly. And it's just so funny because the more you understand, the more you see that these symbols are literally everywhere. And they've just been either dissolved or taken out and used elsewhere. But when you understand that frame of reference, all of a sudden the temple becomes this amazing, cool, here's the origin experience instead of, yeah, it's this weird thing we do.
Well, and even going back to the veil, like it's everything that we are saying here has, like you're saying, it has a cosmological equivalent, right?
Yeah, there's so many levels.
Yes, totally. And it's like, you know, it even, if you go back to the scriptures and you read it with that context, it totally jumps out at you because the earth is being veiled from the presence of the Lord, right?
Yeah.
Because if it's just like the Lord has told many a prophet where he's like, look, if I were to show you everything, he told Moses, if I were to show you everything, then you could not remain here on the earth. And that's not because it's a secret or anything, it's because it would probably kill him. You know what I mean? It's too much.
It would exalt him.
Yeah, it would exalt him. And the same thing would happen to the earth if we were not veiled from you know, wherever the Lord is dwelling at this time. And there's some cool stuff if you go out into space and look around. There's literally a veil or a wall of matter, of dust and rock and stuff that is veiling us from what's on the other side, right? Mm-hmm. And they've been able to shoot like what was it called? It was basically sonar, but it was a super cool version of it, right? And they have said that there is light behind there. They know there's light, and they know there are extremely large bodies, celestial bodies behind there. Mm-hmm. And that there is radiation that they don't exactly know how it works, what it is. But if that wasn't there, they suppose that it would wipe us out, basically. Yeah. It would just, you know, Death Star us, right?
That has some scriptural significance.
Yeah, absolutely. And it ties directly into this stuff that we're talking about.
I'm glad you brought that up, too, because I think we often, and I think Jody Stoddard brings this up, we bring veils up like it's more on the person, right? But really, veils are an act of separation of us from something else.
Right.
And you look at, like, basically the veiling of the power beneath it. So you look at the temple and what happens with women in the veil, and there's some cool implications there. But that makes sense in this context because that veil is protecting us from the power of God, essentially, because we're not ready for it. There's power underneath that we need to be protected from until we reach a certain state. And that's that's the point of veils, is that it's to keep what's underneath it protected from us until we reach the exalted plane. You know?
Yeah, and whenever a prophet has had dealings with Jehovah or Elohim or both, right?
Yeah.
Typically, the norm is to have them taken out of their body, right? And they are allowed to see with their spiritual, but not their physical.
Yeah.
It wasn't until
they open their third eye.
Yeah, exactly. There's another apostate version of it, right? That you can go into in Hinduism and stuff like that. But it's just, I found that was fascinating. Mm-hmm. That it's like, this stuff is here for us not to just learn, but for our protection as well, right? Mm-hmm. And there's some fantastic stuff that goes out into the galaxy and the cosmology version of it.
Yeah.
And even our temples today are cosmological.
So when Brigham Young designed the Salt Lake Temple, you have at the bottom the earth stones. They would depict the rotation of the earth, all 50 of them. Then above that was the moon stones. Above that at the top is the sun stones. And people think of those as, there's a lot of symbolism there, celestial, terrestrial, celestial,
King's
things
glory,
like that.
Yeah.
The original drawings for the temple were going to have Saturn stones above that.
I used to think that the sunstones on there, I thought it was the California raisin. When I was a little kid.
Oh, that's
I
awesome.
totally just brought it back. Sorry. Side
all
note.
good.
Talk about going from right to left.
I know, right?
But that's the cool thing about everything is that all these symbols are related.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
all,
It's true.
they're all taking stuff that they see and hey, let's make a new version of it. But the Saturn stones were going to be on the south-facing only wall of the temple. So above the sun, you would have these Saturn with a couple rings, which only was known basically since Galileo. Everyone depicted Saturn prior to that as the Saturn from myth.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at the sky, you tell me how Saturn is different from everything else. How Mars is red. How, these depictions of Venus as a woman that are universal throughout the world. Like, you tell me how you would get there with what we view right
What
now.
we see right now. Yeah.
Right.
And why would
Without
they
a
have said those
telescope.
things in ancient history
There's
in
no way, yeah.
disseminated separate cultures? And yet you have these Saturn stones that were going to be placed at the top of the Salt Lake Temple. And they ended up not doing it. But again, there's also significant frame of reference that it was only the south wall. So the Earth you can see from everywhere. The moon you can see from everywhere. The sun you can see from everywhere. But you only see that polar convergence of Saturn when you're looking north.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But we do have the Big Dipper on that Salt Lake Temple, which is another reference pointing towards north. Pointing towards that heaven. And that symbol of the Big Dipper is actually rife in ancient star charts as pointing towards heaven, as the center of heaven. And I think I showed you guys this one before, this symbol again, in Hugh Nibley, this zodiac relief on the roof of the Hathor temple, where it not only depicts the oxen flank, which was the symbol for the Big Dipper, at the center of this. But as I'm just understanding the first step into Egyptian, a lot of the symbols in this relief are cosmological, including the 12 figures who have their arms raised in the symbol of holding up the circle of heaven.
Yeah.
Which is another version of the ox, of Atlas, of all these symbols of the ancient sky. Mm-hmm. The Thunderbolts, another big one, where all these ancient cultures have this reference to a thunderbolt, this magnificent thrown lightning of the gods. Nothing we have in science today says anything like that's real, but that same plasma experiment that they conducted that produced those images, it starts to look like the menorah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That's cool as heck.
Yeah.
So again, you have essentially what we're getting at is this great idea that all truth is connected. All truth is part of the great whole of what is true, and what is false does not fit. But also, what is true has to be viewed as one whole. You can never just take out a piece and expect salvation from it, which is the definition of our modern education system. Go study one thing, ignore everything else. Nothing else exists. Just study this one thing. Mm-hmm. But you can never truly comprehend science, education, or more importantly, religion and everything, without realizing that everything is going to be interconnected.
Yeah.
Everything true will echo everything else that is true.
I like how you put that, because it's overwhelming, right, to think that you have to take truth in its entirety to have any of it, right? Because it's so big.
Yeah.
But I think, like you said, the fact that you go to it and you recognize that there is connection is the important part. because you recognize that it goes on beyond your scope of understanding. And I feel like that really encapsulates how I feel when I go to the temple, right? You know, starting from when I first started to where I am now, there's been progression, but I would go, and I still do, and I think, okay, I understand this, but I think there's more here to these things, right?
Yeah.
And then as your understanding expands, you know, and I love going to the temple with my family, especially my mom and my dad, the older generation, and then sitting in the celestial room and just freely talking about things, because it's like all the doors are open, you know, you can say whatever you want to say, and it just expands your understanding. And as you get that, you see the bigger picture, those things start to lock in, and you see more connections. And if anything describes what the purpose of the temple is to me, that's it. It is the eternal progression and understanding, like the expansion of your circle of understanding to a bigger circle of understanding slowly through time.
So there's a quote by Elder Oaks, and this was from the November 2000 Ensign. He called it. It was titled "The Challenge to Become," right? And he says in there, in contrast to the institutions of the world, which teach us to know something, the gospel of Jesus Christ challenges us to become something.
Yeah.
And I thought that absolutely ties into what you were just talking about. That sparked it in my mind. I was like, ooh, I have a quote on that.
Right.
But it's really cool. And you guys are absolutely correct in that I think it's really fun to go through different civilizations and look for little nuggets. Right?
Yeah.
Because even though, like we're saying, that there's some apostate versions of some things, there's some, well, for one, it's fun. For number two, you can learn some stuff from it, right?
Especially from what they have in common.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You take something like the Jewish rabbi who goes when a Jew has passed on and then performs the ceremonial, they call them the death blows, right? Mm-hmm. That was not unique to the Jews. That also, you can go to the Catholic Church and look at what they do with the Pope when he is dead. There's a mallet that they take and they hit his head 3 times. Mm-hmm. They deliver the death blows. It's part of their ritual, right? And all this stuff and I'm obviously being very careful here. Yeah. I'm dancing around some things, right?
Yeah. Make your connections,
yes,
people.
make your connections. But that, I mean, and you do that and then you go and you have to read Nibley. It's a must because he ties all this stuff together so well. Yep. And when Satan or Lucifer at the time was booted from heaven, he was given death blows, right? Mm-hmm. By Michael. That was his charge. Michael was in charge of that. And it all ties into specifically placed things and markings, right? Mm-hmm. And it was done with a sickle and it was done with a knife, right? Mm-hmm. And Lucifer was stripped of a portion of his priesthood and stuff. And like, it's fascinating. That's in the Book of Enoch. Yeah. Not the actual Book of Enoch, but the Book of Enoch written by Hugh Nibley, right?
Yes.
And it's so cool to go through and to see those little things that the Masons also have their own versions of that and stuff. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it all ties together and you can learn some really interesting, cool things from that. Yeah. Fascinating stuff.
Yeah. Understanding not only all this cross-culture stuff and how cool it is, but also understanding origin. We place a huge emphasis on the church, and I think everyone should at all times, because we naturally do, on where did this start, because that has such a significant impact on, is it true or is it a lie? So when we look and see that all these different cultures had these same rites, we can see the echo of the origin of truth. Yeah. When you find the origin in some of these fallen versions, especially fallen religions, that's when you can understand, okay, that's when they went wrong. That's when they went wrong. Mm-hmm. The Nicene Creed for the Catholics. Yep. The origin of Scientology, the origin of Jehovah's Witnesses. When you can find their founders and you can say, oh, hey, that guy in Jehovah's Witness was a college professor who said he made a bet that he could that he could start a religion. And on his deathbed, he said, well, I want to bet, but I created a monster. The Scientology guy, like, his origin was that he was a fiction author who said multiple times, if you want to be wealthy, don't start a business, start a church.
Mm-hmm.
And created just an absolute insane religion of essentially inner torture to its own members and psychological abuse. But one of the things I found the most interesting was the Illuminati. That there is significant records about the Illuminati, and when people hear those phrases, they think what we are taught in like Angels and Demons and some of these, recent movies, The National Treasure, that kind of idea of like these ancient civil secret societies. Mm-hmm. The funny thing is the Illuminati started as a internal from the Masons. This guy inside of the Masons decided, hey, you know what? I don't really believe in God, but I understand the value in these rites and rituals in perfecting a man. Mm-hmm. So he started creating his own inner versions. Mm-hmm. And the Masons aren't a secret society, because anyone who's a Mason can tell you, I'm a Mason.
Yeah.
I'm just not going to tell you what we do. But the Illuminati was a secret society. You were not allowed to say you were an Illuminati. Mm-hmm. And they worked inside the Masons, spreading, and as they would perform their made-up versions of those rites, there's much less value in their symbolisms. It's actually kind of funny that the symbolisms they added had far less meaning than the true Masonic symbolism. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And as he invented his 12 layers of Illuminati, it actually like fell apart at layer 8 or 9 when he and the person he was making up these rites with had an argument, and it never got past that point. So what's super interesting to me about that is you have a guy who's part of the Masons, who was a genius, who was compiling other severely intelligent Masons in this secret society inside of it, that they were trying to have influence, but it wasn't all completed yet. It actually ended up totally failing, washing out completely. Anyone who was part of a secret society at one point was against the law to the point of death. And the Illuminati passed on to legend and myth and is attributed for all of our bads in the world.
Yeah.
But the cool thing for me is seeing, here's the fallen version. Here's what it looked like to have a fallen version, have it take several years to try to flesh it out, have it fall through. Compare that to Joseph Smith. And whether you apply that idea to writing the Book of Mormon, if you think he wrote it, then he must have known a million things. He must have been a time traveler from 100 years future from now, considering all the things he put in there that are just iconically true, yet at the time were not only contrary to religion, but contrary to all of science. But then again, we go from the Book of Mormon to temple rites, and if you think he just made it up, why is it perfect?
Yeah.
If he made it up, why is there no record of the invention of it? No contributing from other people mentioned? No, like, it was just, here's what we do, here's all of it. There's no partial holes missing. There's no flaws somewhere to pick apart. The Book of Mormon contains the fullness of the doctrine of Christ, but not all of the ordinances. So he didn't get the temple from the Book of Mormon.
I don't think there's really anything for face value in the Book of Mormon that has to do with the temple, really. You have to kind of...
You have to know what to look for.
Yeah, you have to know what to look for.
Yeah.
So the beauty of the temple is how significant the symbology is. Not only that symbolism is there, but where it came from. We talk a lot about Joseph Smith in this church because we look at him as the origin, but he was the earthly origin who got everything he knew from God, right, from angels. There's no other way that a farm boy with no formal education could have been just about the smartest man on earth
Oh yeah.
in a matter of 25 years of him being a prophet.
Yeah. There's no way that he came up with the copying Hebrew chiasmus, right?
Yes.
in the writing and stuff.
Right.
There really is too much coincidence to be able to attribute it to just him coming up with it. Even if it was a committee. Let's compare that to the Council of Nicaea, man. You know,
I know, right?
Yep.
There's no way. But it's interesting that we have all this stuff, you know, and we can go through all this stuff. And anybody who's getting ready to go through the temple, if anybody is in that position and you're listening, take the advice of Obi-Wan Kenobi and unlearn what you've learned, you know. Because your Western mindset, you know, and the world is going to tell you, just like Kimball was saying at the very beginning, that this stuff is weird. Just be prepared for it to be weird. And it's like, no, man, this is how it's supposed to be, right? The world we're living in now is the weird construct, you know. Yep. This is the apostate, mean nothing world that we're in now. This is how it's supposed to be. This is what true religion really is what you experience in the temple. And our ancestors understood that a lot better than we do.
Yeah.
Do we want to offer our
I think
closing arguments?
I'll start.
Okay, go ahead.
I love the temple. From the first time I went through, especially after getting the testimony I did the way I did, I knew the church was true. And for me, it was like, wow, there's a lot here. I'm excited to learn what it all means. And then I went on a mission for a few years, came back after having poured myself into scriptures, especially trying to understand Old and New Testament and then teaching it. And when I went through the temple after I got home, there wasn't one on my mission to go to. The power in the symbolism that I saw when I got back was amazing. Every single thing that was said, all the phrasing, it was like I could think of the scriptures that were being referenced or that were references of or connected to everything they were saying. And it was just so cool to be like, I did not understand this the first time I went through. And that's okay. Because it's not about understanding everything. It's about the covenants you make. But the affirmation of your faith, growing your faith into knowledge, is a great progression. And it does take time. And so the first time you go through, you don't have to know everything. But the better you understand that someday you will understand it all, the more respect you can have for what you're going through. And now that temples are mostly closed, I am itching to be able to go back because I've learned so much more in this past year about their symbology and their meaning, the deep things, if you want to call it that, of other cultures and their myths about creation and how they parallel ours. And I'm so excited to go back again and one more time have that experience of, holy cow, I get what this is coming from. I understand these symbolism, these rites, these rituals, that this is, you know, a lot of people complain about or talk about how they fall asleep in the temple. The only reason you would do that is if you're not understanding what's going on,
right.
Because it is fascinating. It's entertaining. Learning in there about creation, that story is going to be so much more significant with more and more better frames of reference. So I would encourage anybody listening, build your testimony line upon line in every way. Seek out the best books and learning. And that will not come from a college. You have to filter everything through the lens that if it's coming from God, it is true. If it's coming through a filter of man, grain of salt. Don't trust it completely.
Yeah.
because the temple is the place where you get true light and knowledge. And I say that in the name of Jesus Christ.
Amen.
Amen.
Go ahead.
Okay. So, as we've been talking here, I had the Article of Faith, number 11, really come into my mind, right? Which is the only one that starts out differently. We claim the privilege of worshiping Almighty God and allow all men the same privilege. Let them worship how, where, or what they may. And I've been thinking about that. And I mean, even here where we live, we have a mosque that's across the freeway that the church helped fund to make it possible. And that's not uncommon. It's the church often will help people build their buildings of religious nature that have nothing to do with our religion, on the face of it, at least anyway. And it reminds me of how President Nelson talked about how the restoration is still ongoing. And if anything, this is really enhanced to me the importance of being able to find what we have in common with other people, because oftentimes it informs what we know and gives it a deeper and richer context. And this is why I believe, the church is so for, not only just because, the more religious freedom there is in the world, the better it is for everybody, but the more that we accept other people's cultures for what they are, we can understand truth. We get bits and pieces that help enrich our own understanding. And I think, if you've gotten anything from all of us talking about all these different cultures that harmonize back to what we know in the temple, there's stuff there, and there's stuff to be learned. And I think that's wonderful for the temple. And then the other thing I had in mind, I love symbology. I think that's kind of the impetus for me to become a graphic designer. I was certain growing up that once I knew I couldn't be an Air Force pilot, that I wanted to understand symbology. Like I wanted to study the language of symbols, and the circle inset in the square where they overlap. That is such a strong symbol for me about how the temple operates for us. The circle being the divine, constantly moving, eternal. And then it brushes with our square-like world, right, that we're talking about in certain points. And it hints at the greater, wonderful majesty of the eternal realms, right, whenever we interface with it, which is that's what the temple is for me. It is a gateway to heaven. It is a stepping stone to the greater. And like we said, the expansion of our minds. And I think, and I'd love to do a podcast on this sometime, but we just, be in a place that you're teachable, that the Lord can show you new things. The Lord can expand your understanding. Allow yourself to think in different ways. And I think we've been doing that a lot on this podcast, trying to force our minds outside of certain boxes, right?
Yeah.
And thinking outside the box has some very awesome implications with that symbol in mind. And with that, I'll say, walk as children of the light, and close in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. I'm a little disappointed. I wasted my Obi-Wan Kenobi quote and didn't use it on my final argument. I obviously wasn't thinking.
How dare you,
How
sir?
dare I? No, but something that I love about the gospel is that it's almost like its own version of technology, right? Mm-hmm. It really does cross across time and across generations, and it's really cool because the things that we have with us now, Adam had, Noah they had these things, right? And even though they were a completely different culture, a completely different people, I think we said last time that if Moses were to come to our church, he'd be like, what the heck is going on? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You guys don't deserve these.
Yeah.
Let me give you the 10 Commandments.
Exactly. You guys must be an apostate version. But it's cool because they had the same stuff and they learned differently from us, but they learned the end result was the same. You know what I mean? And when you take us and our culture and stuff, you take Joseph Smith, right? He's a good representative of us. And he was able to, with a completely Western different mindset, to learn these things. It's incredible, and it really is miraculous to me that the gospel can take all of these different people, different backgrounds, different professions, different ways of thinking, right? We write completely backwards from the ancient world. We do things differently, you know, our mindset, our thought process, and we can all arrive at the same place in the end. Yep. You know, that truly is a miracle. And it's just like how the Savior would use parables to teach. I believe that, just like you're saying, Kurz, that symbology is used to teach us in that way as well, because we all are in different places. We all have different levels of spiritual maturity, as well as just maturity in general, right? And the person preparing for a mission that shows up for the first time to the temple can glean a lot if they are ready. You know, if they prepare themselves sufficiently, which I did not. You know,
yeah, I didn't.
I was not ready. But it's one of those things that as time goes on, you know, and I think that we've all kind of shown that we all are yearning to go back to the temple because of the things that we learned there. Not only just the environment and the basking in the spirit, but being able to go there, especially after learning this cosmology stuff. I'm itching to go back to the temple. You know, I want to go back and see.
Go look for symbols.
Yeah, because this is all recent. You know what I mean? Stuff that I've come across.
Guaranteed you'll find them.
Absolutely. But it's, you know, it really is a huge blessing to have that supply of knowledge coming back again in the latter days, you know, knowing that there was a time when it wasn't around, and where we get all this apostate versions of things. It's a huge blessing to be able to have that. And I hope that when the temple's open, that, and I throw myself in here as well, that we don't take it for granted as we have done, and we get our butts in there and learn and grow and serve, right? And I say that in the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Amen.